start, we have from Judy. Judy asks, we watch your video from Yahoo Finance. Thank you for watching. And I have a question that needs your help. We were planning to rent out our home because of the relocation from Vancouver to Toronto, but as Canadian housing market is a seller's market now, should we sell the house now and wait a few years to buy again? So they bought from Vancouver to Toronto. Okay, Steve, why don't you take this one? What would you advise Judy?
Okay, so I think it always comes down to risk tolerances. I typically prefer not to be out of the market in its entirety. I just think we've seen people try to get cute with that. I mean, I know people in the industry that I have a lot of respect for, very, very smart people that are in the market day to day, that thought, in April of 2020, what seemed like a logical idea to sell your primary residence and go rent for 12 months turned out to be an absolute disaster. So, my view isn't that housing is going higher here in the next 12 to 18 months, but you can never say never. And so my opinion would be, I think if it's a lateral move, you're selling one very expensive, arguably overpriced asset and buying another overpriced asset. It's kind of a wash. You need a place to live at the end of the day. I always say, if you want to get cute, do that with your investment properties. If you want to dump a rental property and try to time the market 2 or 3 years down the road, I think that's the place to do it. I think your primary residence, I think it's a place for you to live in.
Okay, don't get cute with your primary residence. That's a good piece of advice. I know I can tell you I've seen that a couple of times with friends and family who thought that, the prices are going to go down, I'm going to rent, and they're still in that rental. So be careful out there, guys. Okay, let's move on. Next, we have Chris. Okay, I'm looking to get out of Ontario and into somewhere like the prairies. I was in Edmonton in October. I like the city. Your thoughts in terms of the following. Is out west going to be slower than Ontario? If you had to choose between Edmonton, Calgary, or Winnipeg, where would you go to invest, live? I know that, Steve, you've talked about Calgary. You have had some positive things to say about Calgary. But Calgary seems to be the new hype market. I feel like whenever I see people talking on social media around bar, not that I go to many bars these days, but just among friends and my circle, I hear Calgary brought up a lot, and I get asked about Calgary a lot. What's your view on this question, Steve?
I mean, obviously, I full disclosure, I have investments in Calgary, so it's maybe my bias that I think Calgary. It's Canada's 4th largest major metro. Detached house prices are now up 20%. So they have moved a lot over the last year. 20% move for the Calgary market is huge. Keep in mind, though, I think it's important when you actually zoom out and look at that chart on a 15-year, 20-year level. Calgary house prices are still relatively quite flat. So I think affordability metrics there are still very positive. I think Edmonton seems to follow Calgary. If that's anyone's, wants to know where that next move is going to be, Edmonton tends to lag. So that's really all I can say. I think you got to pick a place where you're going to be happy, where you want to go and visit. And, for me anyways, I find Calgary to be an enjoyable city.
Yeah, for sure. Just looking at real estate markets for the few years that I have, every time I look at stats, it's always Toronto up X, Vancouver up X, and then you throw in some other places. But Calgary, Edmonton, for the longest time that I could remember, would just be flat or very minor changes. So it's interesting and sort of surprising to see the more dramatic rise. And it'll be interesting to see if you and others who are so positive on those markets will be right. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one comes to us from Sushma. Sushma asks, I have a variable mortgage. Oh, this is the one that we get all the time. I have a variable mortgage on my condo and recently locked my mortgage rate at 2.39. But my family member said I made a mistake by locking my loan in. So please tell me who is right. John, help Sushma and her family come to peace.
Sushma, it's too late. Don't worry about it. You've already locked in. Don't second guess. Listen, 2.39 is not bad compared to what 5-year rates are today. But I tend to prefer variable personally. It's usually has done better over the long term. If you ever need to cancel, the fees are a lot lower. But listen, 2.39 is still a decent rate. I wouldn't lose sleep about it. you're still doing fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, I mean, just ask your dad or your granddad who will. When I was your age, I had to pay 17% on my mortgage. I walked to school in the snow, uphill, downhill, 10 miles
with no shoes.
With no shoes, no feet. Okay, let's move on. This next question comes from Renew. And Renew wants to know, I'm a first-time home buyer, and I was wondering which is the best place to buy in Ontario. Okay, this is like throwing darts at a dartboard, John. In Ontario, I mean, I can tell you, I spoke to mayors of North Bay and Bancroft, two of the hottest housing markets in this country, up like something like 40-50% over the last year. And I pulled them up on a map to see how far they're from Toronto, and they were both around 2.5 hours and in different directions even. So how far does Renew need to go, or is there someplace near the GTA? I mean, I don't know Renew's situation. She may be perfectly content with Thunder Bay, but where would you suggest she look, John, right now?
I mean, it's such a hard question. I mean, of course, employment's a big thing. I mean, do you have to go to a job? I mean, and if you do, does the place where you're moving to have jobs? If you're working remotely and in theory can move wherever, then I guess it's just personal preference. I mean, again, like the challenge is some of these markets that might be a little bit more affordable are pretty far out there. I mean, and if I was in this situation as a buyer, quite frankly, I wouldn't move out there. Like, even I have a strong preference for owning, I wouldn't want to move in small town Ontario. I'd rather just rent downtown Toronto because I like urban living. So a lot of this is personal preference, I'd say, and looking at the communities you'd be happy in.